What a great honor to be here and speak at this fantastic event. So let me start off telling you a little bit about FedEx. FedEx worldwide has over 490,000 team members. We serve more than 220 countries and territories. Back in 2012, I started my journey with the move of FedEx Express Payroll to ADP for the majority of our European market. In 2016, based on that experience, I was asked to take over reviewing FedEx and TNT's current payroll setup, as well as time and attendance. Time and labor for us was always part of the equation, because as many of you know, it's one of the major inputs to payroll. It's a curious phenomenon, you know? If everything's ticking along nicely, payroll is never mentioned. But if you introduce a new system or a new process, and it leads to mistakes in your employees' paychecks, you're facing a nightmare scenario. Another factor for FedEx was that many of our payroll teams were extremely localized, staffed with payroll practitioners who'd been there for over 25 years and kind of set in their ways. So any change to our payroll landscape was definitely going to be perceived as challenging. So how did we gain enough momentum to make the case for this major payroll change we're going through right now? In 2016, FedEx acquired Dutch-based TNT, which focused management attention on the need to modernize our whole service and IT infrastructure internationally. Outside of the US, FedEx and TNT had a very mixed setup of HR, payroll, and time solutions per country. And we lacked the interfaces between those different applications. I found over 68 different payroll and time and attendance providers, making the contractual overview quite challenging. Our payroll was spread across over 100 teams worldwide, resulting in a lack of international escalation paths and limited best practice sharing. We had also started on our journey of rolling out Workday HCM as our HR system of record globally. With so many different payroll providers and platforms, anytime we tried to consolidate the data, we had to invest significant amount of work to cleanse it prior to being able to present it. One other major factor is, of course, compliance and information security. Another major challenge for us was that most FedEx employees around the world, over 60% in fact, did not have access to a modern time and attendance solution. So having time as part of the equation definitely helped us make the case for our international payroll initiative. We kicked off our global payroll workshop with ADP in June of 2017, followed by the build of the business case, which was finalized and approved in October. And the result was a contract that met all of FedEx's strict policies in full. At the exact same time, May of 2018, when the General Data Protection Regulation was coming into force in Europe. So the main driver for us choosing our payroll provider was the sheer breadth of countries that we service. And then, of course, there's compliance. Throughout the implementation, we were able to review all of the existing payrolls, comparing these to all of the existing collective labor agreements. Another influencing factor for us was the ability to support our large workforce. We definitely needed a payroll provider that had the stability to cope with such a large data load. Aside from ADP's global payroll, we already have ADP best-of-breed solutions in many countries. So that pre-existing relationship and cooperation with ADP was definitely a big influence in our decision to choose ADP as our global payroll partner. So as I stand here today, 2 years since we first started our contract negotiations, what is the big picture? I would say the consensus across our countries is that we've introduced a stable payroll system that calculates exactly what it promised to do. We can now report on all of our payroll information for our employees, drawing from the Insight dashboard of ADP. With ADP's global payroll, I can now check which country's payroll is on time. We now have international ownership and one system to gather information with all data in the same format. And in addition, the standardized systems allow us to apply a set of standardized controls as well. So let me share some key takeaways. On the business case of the process, it helped significantly to get our base numbers right. and find out just how many team members were working within the payroll department. Another tip on the business case phase is to make sure you allow more time than you think you will need. On the experience of negotiating the contract, I'd say you definitely need to meet in person and dedicate the time to go through that contract with a fine-tooth comb. It's that detail that will drive your implementation process, especially around respective roles and responsibilities for implementation, and even more importantly, for the actual payroll process afterwards. One thing we didn't do in the beginning was to prioritize payroll by region. From now on, we'll be focusing on a maximum of 1 or 2 regions at a time. In terms of how I approach the implementation process and what I've learned from that, well, I'm someone who likes to be extremely involved. Payroll teams are typically understaffed and already working at maximum capacity. You need to share the load with other people. Now, I've had to shift my thinking to one that encourages our local teams to take on their fair share. I found that you have to be willing to adapt your communication style. It's hard to get the local engagement you need to implement a new payroll system, so really take the time to sit down and plot out a change management strategy. So for future countries, we'll have an in-depth country preparation phase. We'll include process mapping of all local processes to identify any gaps in service levels. We'll run workshops explaining the new responsibility matrix in detail, addressing any questions immediately. We've been holding a series of client care workshops recently with our in-country and ADP teams to see how we can restructure our roles and responsibilities internally to mirror what ADP does with their regional service centers. The aim is to have our teams ideally match the service ADP provides, so we eliminate the potential for any frustration to creep in on the back of incorrect expectations. Thank you.